Good evening. Good evening. And welcome to Chicago Public Library. I'm Jennifer Lezak with the Cultural, Civic, and Literary Engagement Team in the Adult Services Department. And on behalf of everyone at CPL, welcome. Before we begin our program, we ask you to please silence your cell phones. I want to thank the Chicago Public Library staff who worked to make this event possible. Tonight, as part of CPL's Black History Month programming, we are so pleased to welcome author, award-winning writer, legal scholar, and civil rights advocate Gloria J. Browne-Marshall to discuss her latest work, A Protest History of the United States. Gloria is a professor of constitutional law and Africana studies at John Jay College, CUNY, an award-winning writer and a legal commentator. She has litigated cases for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and Community Legal Services. Her previous works include She Took Justice, The Black Woman, Law, and Power, and The Voting Rights War. A frequent commentator on CNN, NPR, and MSNBC, Gloria has received numerous accolades, including the 2024 American Bar Association Silver Gavel Award. Gloria is in conversation tonight with Jamie Nesbitt-Golden. Jamie is a reporter for Block Club Chicago, where she covers Bronzeville and the Near South Side. This Bronzeville native's work has also appeared in XO Jane, Salon, and Tom. She has won several awards, including the 2023 Journalist of Distinction from the National Association of Black Journalists. Please join me in welcoming Gloria and Jamie to the CPL stage.
Hello. Are we excited for tonight? Cool. Thank you so much, Gloria, for joining us. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. So how was your trip in? Was it?
New York has snow.
So you made the right choice. You made the best decision.
Yes.
And you're missing our deep freeze coming this weekend, so that's perfect. It's perfect for you.
Yes, it's really great. I saw people in short pants. So this was great.
Glad to hear it. So a little icebreaker, since we're talking about protests. Gloria, would you happen to have one?
I have a lot. As a matter of fact, I led a protest last year for President's Day from New York and New Jersey to the Capitol. And I began singing on the bus. And I realized if I could really sing, I'd be dangerous. So I love everything Mahalia Jackson sang. You know, Mahalia Jackson was just somebody, I still listen to her on Sundays. I listen to her when I need to get pepped up or I'm feeling down. She just has something that touches my soul. I just think of how we got over is one of those that if you have a chance to listen to Mahalia Jackson, you know, and she just talks about falling and rising over again. And I think that's part of what we need to actually think about when it comes to protests, the ups and the downs of it. And those songs kept us going up when we were feeling down.
And they were also a form of protest, a form of resistance.
Yes, and that's, you know, the whole idea of expanding protests to include much more than the protests in the streets, which are necessary, vital, and foundational. But there are so many other parts of protests, and that's one of the things that I want to have my book reflect, that you can be a part of the protest and not happen to be the person who's in the street with the sign.
Would you say this was your most challenging book to date?
I think this is, I'm not getting any younger, and you know, I didn't have a personal life before, now I really don't have one. But the idea of rewriting this book 3 times.
Wow.
And sometimes I read it and I go, I still didn't get it.
Now, how many years were these rewrites?
I think this book, because I wrote another book and a play, because I began my life as a playwright. Before I went to law school, I was a playwright. I still see myself as a playwright. But the creative side in me made me say, what was initially a book where I wanted to give a legal argument in support of protest, and then I realized not all protests had legal cases attached to them. So I said, okay, now I've got to rewrite it again, because the book was based on just the legal cases around protests. Right. So then I started looking at the people and say, oh, I'll focus on the protesters. But then I thought, well, when do I start and when do I end? So I decided that the indigenous people are the original resistors. They're the original protesters. So I have to start there. So now I'm 500 years in. And going forward, yes, then now expanded protest. And I thought about, well, slave uprisings were protests. and the petitions, the abolitionists, and the newspapers of Frederick Douglass, and so many other ways in which protest was realized, then I said, okay, I'll restructure it again, and I'll try for chronology. That didn't work.
Yeah.
Because there's so many different protests, and then it became almost encyclopedic. So I decided that I would make it into chapters. And so each chapter would have its own arc of time and selected protests and protesters within the chapters. And then the chapters would be then put together in a way in which it gives a book an arc of time. So and then I decided, because I didn't have enough to do, that and I was advised that it needed to have some spirit, some heart, some soul. So I frightened myself, and I still do, by having memoir. And so the historians in the room, I know, they're like, oh, that's a survey. No, it's not. No, it's not. Stop it. Stop it. Okay, because my background is in law and legal history, I was looking at pattern and practice, which is something that's not really understood outside of law. So the lawyers in the room know pattern and practice.
Of course.
So over 500 years, I like to see what are the patterns and practices of this country. And law is one anchor that you could see. It's a light, because you can see the laws being enacted, you can see the laws challenged, but in between you see life happening. And so I wanted to have the law, but I wanted to have the people who didn't rise to the level of having a case connected with their name. And so I decided to use someone who'd been told to me, and that was my great-great-grandmother Eliza, who was born enslaved. And so I decided that I would use her life as a marker of the protests that didn't have law connected to them. And then I said, well, why not use other family members? They're not here anymore. So it's like, and so I used them as well. And then I decided that's not fair. Let me put my own life in, which is, very, because you're not supposed to go through that wall. You're supposed to stay detached. Whether or not it's law or traditional history, you're supposed to be detached from the subject. And I decided to make it interdisciplinary and personal, storytelling in a way that would actually touch people so they could see themselves in it. And so every time I've said this to you, that's how many times the things changed. And then my editor said, okay, enough already. We need a book.
It's done.
Stop. This is whatever you have, that's good. We're going to go with that. And so I would say, no, but see, it's like, no, there is no more.
You're cut off.
No
more.
No more. Step away from the bar. So at that point, the structure then becomes the many arcs of the chapters, each chapter with an arc, and then the overarching arc, so that beginning with the indigenous, and I have cousins who are Bradshaws, my mother's family line, but they're also intermarried into indigenous families. So I start with the indigenous, and I end with my cousins who are, bi-indigenous. And so that then brings the storyline through, and that to me, yes,
brings it all together.
It brings it all together, and so I wanted people to see that I begin the book with my great-great-grandmother Eliza and slavery, but then she ends up in Kansas, and then the story arc intertwines with the indigenous people in Kansas.
Wow.
So that we can move forward and see how the protests happen.
In the chapter, What is a Slave to the 4th of July, you mention the story about your great-great-grandmother, and it was called My Grandmother's Story, that was written by her granddaughter. And you see that as a form of protest in itself, writing this essay. Can you talk about that a little more? Like, how is the power of the pen the key here?
So, am I going to read any part of this? Am I going to read any section
Yeah,
of this?
if you feel if you want, please do.
Okay. And then maybe you'll have an idea of what I'm talking about. There was nothing unusual about 7-year-old Eliza, an enslaved girl born in Mercer County, Kentucky, about 1827. In need of a quick influx of money to pay off a $1,000 debt, Eliza's owner, J.A. Lewis, sold her to Thomas and Harriet Christian, a couple looking for a house slave. Eliza was my great-great-grandmother on my mother's side. Maddie Lethea Bradshaw, her granddaughter, wrote an account of Eliza in a 1907 student essay when Eliza was still alive, and Maddie, a graduate of Topeka High School, was studying to be a teacher at Kansas Normal School. Maddie's essay, titled My Grandmother's Story, was published in the October 18, 1907 edition of the school paper of the Kansas State Normal School, now Emporia State University. Dr. Sam Dix, a history professor at Emporia State University, found Maddie's article about Eliza and researched her story as a descendant of the Exoduster movement in what he then titled Eliza Bradshaw, an Exoduster grandmother. Maddie's essay of 1907 was written as a protest of this country's heinous past, but she shared Eliza's humanity, an act of defiance as protest as well. So when Eliza, a student, writes this essay, the essay is good enough to be published in the school journal. That essay is then found in 2000 by a white professor at Emporia State. He then researches it. He writes a scholarly journal based on the article that Maddie, or the essay that Maddie wrote. I then see his article, and then his article is now in my book.
Wow.
Maddie, and it gives me chills still, Maddie is saying Eliza lived, and she is not going to be forgotten, and her life mattered. And what this country did to her, enslaving her, forcing her to work for free up until the time of 1865 when slavery ended, was something that no person should forget. And so in writing this, I picture Maddie at the kitchen table writing. And she had an opportunity after she graduated to be a teacher, and she taught for a while, and she was really good. But then Eliza's declining health made her, Maddie, make a decision. She gave up teaching to take care of Eliza. Wow. And I think about expanding protests, and as they begged Maddie, please stay and teach, her decision to stay with Eliza, who then died later of dementia. And this is a woman, Eliza, her protest was fighting against the slave masters. Her protest was also leaving Kentucky during that time period of 1877, when Reconstruction, the end of Reconstruction, allowed these terrorists, domestic terrorists, to come and burn down the schools and the businesses that these former enslaved people had built. She left Kentucky, protest. And those people who are here today because your relatives left other places, that was a protest. No different to me than Eliza's protest with her husband Lewis to leave Kentucky as exodusters, the first great wave of black migration, to go to Kansas. And she's there less than a year and Lewis dies. Wow. So she's done all of this. She survived slavery. She leaves Kentucky. She travels all the way, spending all the money that they have to start a homestead during a drought in Kansas, and Lewis, her husband, dies. Survival is protest. And she decided to survive. She decided to continue to have a life. So when we think about protest, we can think about all these different ways, and that's why it was important for me to include and interweave my family, because they didn't form these major lawsuits. I mean, William Bradshaw did. He was a lawyer, my cousin, who was part of the cases that led up to Brown versus Board of Education. So then we have the more traditional ways in which protests can show itself in these protest litigation cases. But I feel Eliza with me, and I think during these time periods we need to call on our ancestors to give us the courage to do the things we need to do during this heinous time in our country.
I like that you touched on the fact that Eliza's great-granddaughter wound up caring for her at the end. And in the next page, you write this: caring for each other as human beings, However, it was a form of protest against an unconscionable fallacy that non-whites were devoid of human feelings. And I think about how even now we're hearing conversations about how devoid of humanity we are still. But you say, again, caring for each other is this radical act, which is also a form of protest. If you can sort of expound on that a little more.
I remember being in Indiana in 2018, and I was speaking before these judges and lawyers and others, and I was talking about slavery, and I talk about slavery as an aspect of greed. If you could get away with not paying people, would you? And how many of us know that we've worked on jobs that if they could get away with not paying you, would they? And if you look at slavery that way, you better understand what was happening, and then later on blame it on race. And so I remember someone coming up to me later saying they were told by their spiritual leader that black people didn't have souls. This was 2018. So
that's right up there with us not having tails either, according to Mormons.
Well, my uncle, my late uncle, who served in World War II and was in France, went to a farmhouse where the soldiers were all, gathering to eat, and they said, "I'm sorry, we don't have the proper chair for you." And he asked, "What type of chair do you mean?" "The kind with a hole in it so your tail will fit," because the white soldiers had told the French people that, that black men had tails. So you have this propaganda. There's always going to be this propaganda to try to, make other people feel superior. And so I just think that the fact that folks will say, "Oh, people of color or black people," even now, immigrants don't care about their children the way we do. They don't love their families. And I always used to say, my mom's passed now, but I used to say, "I love my mother the way you love your mother. Why don't you look at it that way?" And people would actually stop and go, "I never thought about it like that." And because most people don't realize when they're talking to someone from another group, whatever it may be, that they're human beings with hopes and joys and disappointments and fears and everything else. In addition to all the traps and obstacles that come up with the isms, the racisms, the sexisms, the xenophobia, and every other ism, anti-Semitism. So I think that to love anyway, when people put you in a corner and say you're not a human being, you're devoid of humanity, you're a cruel person, I always think it's amazing to me that black people of African descent, minding our own business on another side of the world, folks come and get us, kidnap us, abduct us, torture us, bring us here, and then say we're the violent ones.
As we're taking care of their families.
As we're taking care of their families and cooking their food and doing it. And so I'm just looking at this, no matter if you want to, anybody can make another person less than human, because it feeds a point of ego. But if you fall into line and say, "Well, you don't care about me, so I'm not going to care about you. I'm going to love anyway." I might necessarily love that person. I mean, I'm still working on that. God's still working on me. Okay,
I think he's working on all
He's
of us.
still working on me with that one. But I will say, if you love anyway, just to love anyway is a protest against being put into a box or a corner and made to feel as though you're incapable of love. To go after your dreams. And I have, one story in the book about being a writer, and I always wanted to be a writer, and I filled out all my applications and everything and wanted to write, and the mailman apparently threw away my applications. And this is back before they were online.
Wow.
Threw them all away because I contacted the schools and I kept waiting for a response to my applications, and we never received your applications. My applications to University of Iowa writing program, to the law school, to this big stack I'd spent so much time on. I was devastated, and I thought, sitting here, having someone listening to me talk about my books, to have that dream anyway is a protest. So if you have that in your heart, to go forward anyway, despite the people who told you couldn't, that is an act of protest. And so once you begin to realize if you can restart your life, follow that dream, act in the way of humanity when people think you have none, it is an act of protest.
So wow. Yes, thank you for that. That was powerful. Going back to exodusters and how they, again, came up north for a better life, for better opportunities, for safety. We're now seeing a number of us leave America for the same reasons. Would you consider that part of protest?
Yes. The same way people arrived here because they were protesting the treatment they were receiving in other countries. I asked the question, well, where is my America? Where do I go to get the things that people wanted from this country? And so I have friends who are expatriates who are in France and Africa. They're
Same.
you know, whether Ghana or Senegal, you know, they are living in other nations, in Italy. You know, so they've decided that enough is enough. You know, so yeah, they are.
I think about so many of us who made names for ourselves overseas.
Yes.
And made homes for ourselves overseas.
You know, I had an opportunity to actually speak on, you know, France 24, France 24 network last week, and as German television, people in other countries are interested. They're watching us. They are watching what we do and how we're doing it. They're paying attention to it because what we do affects other countries. But it also means that here I am, a very proud African-American woman on German television, discussing the U.S. Constitution, discussing issues of politics taking place in this country, being respected for my intellect. In a nation where we have an administration that's trying to put, not even trying,
Yes.
is depicting people of African descent as folks who don't deserve the positions that we're in. I mean, the abomination of putting the faces of Michelle Obama and our former president, Barack Obama, in those horrible depictions. You know,
Didn't back down from it.
But it's also a desperate act. And this is the same desperate act you saw in the 1930s. You saw these desperate acts taking place in the 1920s here in the United States, even in the 1800s with the Chinese. And that's how we had the Chinese Exclusion Act. I mean, this happened with so many different groups. It happened with the Italians. It happened so many times with people coming into the country. But to see our highest office using such depictions to spread the word and try to put the seeds in the minds of people that you're not human. The question then becomes, we've already shown black excellence. We've shown ourselves to be excellent in every area.
Even with all the roadblocks.
With all the roadblocks. And so I think it's going to be very difficult. What do we tell our children? What do we tell the young people, you know, at this stage of the game? What do we tell the college students?
How do we give them hope in the midst of all this?
And that, I think, goes back to the ancestors.
Connecting with
the ancestors. We're going to have to say, because we've gone through this before. I was looking at history and seeing that during the time period of the so-called Spanish flu epidemic or pandemic, we had also a rise in racial animus. We had a rise then too in 1918, 1919, 1920. We had race riots across the country. It was called the Red Summer of 1919 because they said the streets ran red with blood because there were so many attacks on the black community. Some attacks took place around here too. So I don't know if this is a part of what happens during a pandemic.
It seems like you say, like what was old is new again in terms of anti-black racism and also anti-science, because back then
there was a rise in anti-science, a rise of certain religious denominations that were also feeding into racism. So when you start to look at history and you see how history is repeating itself, it's another reason why it's important to know your history. And then you better understand that this is not the beginning of something. This is an ongoing battle. And every country has its issues.
Yeah.
And that's why protest is so important, because protest has been a part of the nation even before it started.
I find it interesting, like when you mentioned you were in Germany and how you were well received there, considering the history of Germany. I find that really interesting. And what were some of the conversations you were having with
Well,
folks?
I was on German broadcast.
Okay.
But I'd been to Germany before as part of a delegation around human rights. And you can't believe this, but last week I was with PEN America as part of a delegation at Texas A&M. And very similar, censorship, lack of academic freedom, students who are being used to be planted into classrooms to tape professors in order to get them fired.
Wow,
I mean,
yeah.
these are some of the things that are going on in universities. We have portals at universities where students can report a professor because they feel uncomfortable in the classroom. Now, I don't know how much comfort is supposed to be in education.
I was told supposed to be uncomfortable, that you're supposed to.
But also, if you get too comfortable, I think they fall asleep. So, but this is what's going on right now. And so these are some of the things that happened before. But those students are protesting there. Professors are protesting. And we have to support others so that we're not in silos. And that the academics who are protesting have some type of camaraderie with the unions protesting and the other groups that come together.
But we're seeing also a lot of universities sort of like fall in line with the current administration's take on these DEI policies. Like, how do we fight back? How do we continue to resist against this?
I think it's going to be those people who can afford to resist. And I have seen the No King's Day protests. I was the last one, or in October. I believe I was in Little Rock, Arkansas, for the No Kings. I was doing a book talk there and participated in the No Kings protest in Little Rock, Arkansas. I think that people who can afford to protest should, and we should figure out ways that work for you. And that's what I think.
That's what I wanted.
Yes.
I'm glad you said that, because I think when I think back to the days when Twitter was Twitter and not the current cesspool is now, it was a useful tool for organizing, right? With Arab Spring, with Ferguson, we're seeing people use these tools as a way to communicate and to organize. But you also had a fair share of detractors who believed that it was lazy, that it wasn't as effective as getting out in the streets. What would you say to that?
I think that we need all forms of protest. The struggle needs all of our talents. It needs our energy. Some of the very same things that people are getting paid for would be useful in this struggle for our democracy. So I was in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was talking to a group there, and I said, who's good with messaging? Because for some reason, progressives just can't get to the point. Okay.
It's very much like,
Yes.
I have a comment that's more like a question, question that's more like a comment, and it's forever.
It's like we can't seem to just make a nugget.
Just hit it.
Just go hit it and walk away.
Yeah.
Okay, and so I said it should be like a tattoo. So maybe we could have tattoo artists coming up with our messaging, and then of course a young man walks up with a paragraph on his arm. It's always something.
Can't read all that, but good luck. Yeah.
Yes, but I just think that the messaging, even when we go to, for example, Ice Out, quick, to the point messaging, and I think we had to have the rallies this time last year that went into the fall, where we came together as community, because we had been isolated by social media.
Yep.
We had been behind our screens, and we were post-COVID. So we were in our different individual silos, our family silos. And so the initial months of rallies where we had the very quippy signs up and the costumes, I think that was necessary for us to see ourselves in community. And then as things became more serious, the protests became more serious. And then we began to evolve, and my research has shown that that's what happens. We have to have community. We have to see ourselves in other people who may not be ourselves. And I'll give this example, and I think this, y'all just may appreciate this. We can vote at age 18. That was not always the case. The Constitution had to be changed in order to lower the voting age from 21 to 18. When we protest for something, we then take it for granted like it's always been there. It wasn't. And then we had to, the 18-year-olds who were going off to Vietnam saying, well, if I'm old enough to draft and go to war, I should be old enough to vote. Some of the people remember that. But see, we forget as though it never happened. Now, those 18-year-olds, those 20-year-olds had to then convince the 21-year-olds and older to vote to change the Constitution. So when we protest, it has to be more than the group you're in that's already protesting. Mm-hmm. The protest has to persuade people outside of your group to join in any way they can. And that's why the messaging is so important. If somebody's driving by and you're leading a protest, they have a split second to read your sign. What is it saying to them? It might be entertaining to you, but what is it saying to people outside? If that news camera, and we're going to talk about the news, if the news camera happens to be there and happens to flash over those signs, what will it say to the millions or hundreds of thousands of people who are watching that newscast? You have an opportunity to persuade others to join your fray. I was in Dallas, and I had an older woman, she looked old to me anyway, and she walked up to me and she said, she is a conservative Christian and a Trump supporter. And she came to my book talk. Now, I gave her credit. She came and sat on the front row. And here's the reason why. She said, I don't understand what people are protesting about. Life is good in this country. Here you've grown, but then if you look at the signs, where would she get the information if she only watches a certain news channel?
Or talks to certain people.
Only talk to certain people. Who's going to be the ambassadors to enter her orbit and give her this information? So sometimes you need to begin your protest with your relatives. Kind of got quiet.
Uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner conversations?
Yes. We have all types of holidays right now. And
we are in the middle of Black History Month. I mean, what better time?
Yes, but we also have a lot. We have Ramadan going on. We have the Lunar New Year going on. We have a lot of holidays. We have Easter coming up. Yep. We have lots of holidays. And instead of sitting there going, you know what, I'm going to take the high ground.
Or suffer in silence.
And suffer in silence. No, call out racist Uncle Jed. Call him out.
You know, Jesus flipped tables. I'm just saying.
You know what? Yes.
Flip a table? Maybe?
You know, you cook the dinner. You don't want to flip the table, but
okay,
I'll tell
after
you.
Dinner. Don't do it before.
But, that is your dinner, and you'll be at home
like the table will flip
okay.
fire on a full stomach, right?
But the idea that we go outside to proselytize and we're afraid to talk to our own relatives, practice on them. I asked, and I lost a friendship. I asked, one of my best friends, why did you vote for this administration? They couldn't give me a logical answer. They just got frustrated, hung up the phone, and we haven't talked since. And we had known each other for years. She was in my wedding, everything. So asking that question put the question in her mind. And as an educator, and for any of the educators who are here, you know that if you bring up the subject in the classroom or wherever you are, that information is in that person's mind. Okay? That is something you should remember, that you may not be able to convince them now, but that is an argument that they're going to have to consider because the brain now has it. So you don't have to scream and holler. Here's a tactic, very quick. When you're having a discussion, the argument is the issue on the table, not the personal attack. Keep it the issue on the table. Why did you vote for Trump? If they have other things they want to say, well, who are you? This, that, all of these other things, keep it very narrow, very closed. Ask it twice, whatever the question may be. Now leave it alone. This is what my mentor, the late Jocelyn Clopton Cooper, taught me. She said, make your statement, make your point, walk away, leave it alone. Let them have a chance to think about it in the privacy of their own home. But it's there for them to think about. But if you don't have access to them, if you don't have a sign with messaging that's going to be something that's outside of the group that you're protesting with, my research has shown those people are not going to be affected. That's why you have lobbyists. That's what lobbyists do. They take an issue to people who are not going to be in the room at the time to tell them about it. So think of the protest signs as a way of lobbying other people.
And I'm glad you, again, bring up the fact that, again, it takes all of us as a community. And I think about the late Reverend Jesse Jackson, who, again, sort of pushed for that multiracial, coalition of people. In the book, you mentioned Bacon's Rebellion, which involved white farmers fighting alongside black enslaved folk against wealthy landowners. And how that was aborted, or that was ruined by the wealthy landowners who figured out a way to divide the two groups. And I was wondering if you can sort of talk about that, and what are the things we should be learning from that particular incident?
Before we had 1776, and of course, this year is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which means it's the 250th anniversary of our nation, because our nation begins, the clock starts with the Declaration of Independence. 100 years before that was Bacon's Rebellion in Virginia. And during Bacon's Rebellion, there was this idea that the poor indentured servants, and these were the Europeans who could not afford their freight over on the ship, and so they paid for it with their labor as indentured servants in a contract that they had to work a certain number of years. You also had, and just to give you a quick lesson, I don't mean to hurt somebody's feelings, but our country does not begin with Plymouth Rock. It does not begin with the Pilgrims. Sorry. It begins in 1607 in Virginia. 1607. We've used so much myth that we don't even know the origin of our own nation. It begins in 1607 as an English colony that was a charter by businessmen who wanted to be a part. King James, the same King James version of the Bible, King James, gave a charter to businessmen who then, decided that they would send people to the New World, North America, which became Virginia, to start this colony. That was in 1607. 1619, 20 and odd Africans arrived into that colony. 1619. The Mayflower landed in 1620. We were here before the Mayflower. We were here before the Mayflower. So when we start talking about diversity, we had the Powhatan Native Americans, we had the Europeans, we had the Africans all together by 1620. And so those indentured servants started to see a commonality with the Africans, and they began to fight against the elite. This is the shortened version of Bacon's Rebellion. And it was, and together they were powerful. And but for Bacon dying of dysentery, we would have seen a different outcome perhaps. But he did die, and so the elites won. They put down the rebellion, but they learned a lesson. If poor whites and Africans come together, it will make a force they cannot deny. If poor whites and Africans, in this case African Americans, come together, it would create a force that could not be denied. So they came up with this scheme, very important, divide and conquer. And in divide and conquer, they would give poor whites something indelible. What's indelible? Can't be changed. Pigment. Based on your pigment alone, you're superior. We're going to give you a little more because of your pigment, just a little more than the Africans have. And so with that little more, you're going to feel superior to the Africans. You're going to be the overseer. You're going to get a job just a little bit higher than this other group. And so they started this conflict, even though that's going back to Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson, the reason why it was a rainbow coalition, because he said we have more in common than we have that's different. But divide and conquer will pit us against each other. And so being pitted against each other, we're fighting, and then the elite rise up. And that's what we've had generation after generation. This idea that how do you become this American? You become this American by oppressing someone else, in particular a person of color. And then you become part of this white membership, even if it's second or third class membership. But then you have the Italians who come and they protest and they say, you know, I'm not going to be treated this way. The highest number of people who were lynched at one time were Italians. Lynched at one time. And then it's this sense of, well, if you can't beat them, join them. There's a book, How the Irish Became White. The same thing. The Irish come in. They're protesting against their ill treatment. And then they turn around and it's like, well, we'll become part of the police.
Kind of law enforcement.
We'll be those people who then put the people of color in their place. And so you have this churning. It's so American that the people come in, they protest being marginalized, but then they want to be part of the group that's oppressing other people in order to prove their Americanness.
And eventually, that conditional whiteness is kind of stripped away at some point. Like just like it's granted, it can also be taken away.
It can also be taken away in this idea that, just like in Minneapolis, when you see the people come together, look at the power of that. In Chicago, look at the power of that. With George Floyd, you saw such diversity of the protest, the power of it. That power is what the elites do not want. And I won't say all elites. There are some people who are in there who have lots and lots of money and still have a sense of social justice. But I don't know what happens when the zeros get added, what happens to the heart. What does it do a man to inherit the world and lose his soul? So I look at this and I think there's unity. I want to do like very quickly.
Yeah, of course.
And this is something I've come up with. Strategy, tenacity, time, allies, resources, and creativity. I call it STARK. Here's the STARK good news. Strategy. What is the strategy? What's the tactic that you're using in the protest? Who are your allies? The allies have to be diverse. There is power in our diversity. What are our resources? Everybody comes with something. Maybe you have the car to drive the people. Maybe you are artistic and have the signs, the messaging. Maybe you have the money to give to the bail fund or the resources to help people who have lost their jobs. Maybe there are allies who are distinctive in certain ways who want to stay behind the scenes. I like to use this name, Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin gave so much money during the Civil Rights Movement and no one ever knew it. So you don't have to have your name out there. You can figure out ways in which you can give resources. And then creativity. If you use, and I'm going to say this, if you use the same traditional tools to try to tear down what has already been built, you're going to lose because the people who built it know better than we do where all the crooks and crannies are. But creativity will have us navigate around those things that have been built. Creativity in litigation, legislation, creativity in our protests, the ways in which we protest. The protests right now with Target have been on target. This is the second CEO of Target who's in trouble because of lost profits. That Target protest is working. They are working. And because we have so much corporate media, I'm giving an entree, who are not covering the effectiveness of protests, we might be lulled into believing protest doesn't work or what we're doing is not really moving the needle, but it really is.
So to that point about media's complicity in, thank you for that. Because I'm reminded of how media covered, the racial stories in Ida B. Wells' time, right? It was very much casting her as the villain in a lot of this coverage. And the same thing sort of is happening here. As we saw, certain media outlets sort of describe what happened in Minneapolis as, well, they either downplay it or they once again cast the residents fighting back as villains. If you can talk about, what can media do in this moment to redeem itself, to be the true, chroniclers of history here?
It's going to have to speak truth to power. And we can in our individual voices, and that's why it matters how many people are out there protesting, how long, time and tenacity. You can't protest on Friday and expect to change on Monday. Usually that's not the way it's going to happen.
The Birmingham, I think the Birmingham boycott lasted how many years?
Montgomery, Montgomery bus boycott.
Sorry, it's been a long day.
Lasted over a year. but here's the other thing. You think about the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and how long people protested for that. So the anti-war protests stopped the Vietnam War. But it's like we forget the effectiveness of the protest. The 8-hour workday, the reason why we have an 8-hour workday is not just because there was a law. If you go to Haymarket, and I'm sure you've passed the plaque there, we have an 8-hour workday because there are protests. Ulysses S. Grant signed into law an 8-hour workday in the 1800s. We didn't get it until the 1900s, and that's because of protest.
But to your point, it's an ongoing thing.
But you have to, you think about what is an ongoing thing, but you have to think about what media is. In many cases, media has also been the traditionalists. Media has also covered what people who are buying the paper want. And some people buying the paper don't want to hear about protests. Protesting can be dangerous because you're going to the status quo, the people in the community, and you're saying what you're doing is wrong and should be changed. That's upsetting to people. So even if you do nothing else, you're going to have propaganda. You're unpatriotic. Why don't you go live somewhere else if you don't like this country? You don't understand what America is. All of these things. If we think about freedom of speech is in the First Amendment that was ratified in 1791. Do you think all of you had freedom of speech? Your ancestors had freedom of speech in 1791? I don't think so, because the Constitution was written as the structure of government, but also as something for the states and federal government and for rich people. We, the individual, regular people, had to protest our way into the Constitution. That wasn't thought of regular people in the Constitution. That was something unique, but we take it for granted. It was always a part of it. So when we have the powers that be, who are looking at our foundational documents, they're looking at it for the business person. They're looking at it for the corporate interest. They're looking at it for empire building. They're looking at it for the government. And so for the most part, media has usually been, unless it's sensationalism, it's been on the side of the status quo. And that's why Martin Luther King was so masterful in figuring out ways to get the media's attention. That's where the creativity comes in. And that's what I've also seen, where disruption comes in. When you go from rally to gathering, commonality, to figuring out how to disrupt in a nonviolent way. How do you disrupt creatively in a nonviolent way? Sit-ins were nonviolent disruptions. So if people are deciding they're going to bring the cause to the attention of many who are not thinking about it, don't want to think about it, or not affected by it, then you have to figure out a way to stop traffic. You have to figure out a way to go into a store. And some people have, and other places. They've gone into Target stores or to, Home Depot, and they've done things that have been disruptive in nonviolent ways. But that creativity is amazing. It's something you have to have. And as you pointed out in the very beginning, songs were creative. Yet Strange Fruit still tells us about lynching. And we need to understand that theater, for those people who are in theater or think about theater, theater is supposed to be a platform for what is taking place as well as entertainment. So we need to get our theaters to make sure that they are actually presenting what's going on today. There are so many ways in which we can be disruptive forces and do it nonviolently. And nonviolent protest, very quickly, means you go into the protest not thinking of violence. And if violence happens, you don't respond in a violent way. That's the nonviolent philosophy. I don't know where I am with that yet, but that's the nonviolent
God's still working on
philosophy.
me on that
People
too, yeah.
actually take classes in this. It's not something you just wake up and do, because it's against our instincts not to fight back if we're harmed. And that's why when I had a chance to talk with elders who were students during the Selma marches, these high school students took weekly classes on the nonviolent philosophies. Are we willing to do that? Are we really willing to read books on nonviolent philosophy so we know what it is, as opposed to just saying be nonviolent as though it just falls out of the sky? It goes against our human nature to be nonviolent if somebody hurts us or hurts someone we care about. So, there's so many aspects that we need to respect for the people who got us the rights that we have today. That they were brilliant, they were strategists, they were tacticians, they had courage, they had creativity. And if we just learned more about what they did, I think we would then be empowered to even have better protests and more effective protests than we have right now. And maybe the news media will play a role in actually covering it.
We have to apply pressure to them too, and I
Yes.
think thank you so much for this. I think we went a little over because we still have time for questions. If anybody has any questions.
Hi, yeah, we have time for a few questions. So if you have one, raise your hand. I will run a mic over to you. You can ask it, and then I'll run it to the next person. Okay, here.
Hi, hopefully this is quick. Thank you so much for being here tonight. As you were speaking and talking about the different ways in which we all can participate in protest, it made me think about some of the expectations that get built for certain people to protest and how they need to protest, and this specifically is about Black women. So there becomes this expectation that Black women are supposed to be the voice. We are supposed to be out there. We're supposed to protect everyone as if we are the matriarch of humanity, which may be true, but still, the expectation of labor seems to be attached to Black women in some capacity. So I'm curious how you feel about that, or your thoughts about how to approach that, or just what you think in general about the sense of that expectation and obligation that seems to be placed on Black women.
I think we actually talked about this, so I thank you so much for raising that question. For those of you who are not in the family, who may not know what's been going on, it's like when Kamala Harris lost the election because there was the ability for her to be elected, and some people decided they wanted this administration for whatever reason. As I said, I've asked people and they can rarely tell me the reason behind their, they said, it's because the stock market would go up. And it's like, but you don't own any stocks. But so Black women who had worked, feverishly over the 4 months of Kamala Harris's campaign were devastated. And I was one of those devastated people. Because I was like, you have this great candidate and you have somebody else who's saying he's going to be a dictator. Why do you want a dictator? And so Black women was like, okay, you made this mess. This is what I'm telling you. I'm introducing you to a family conversation. So if you were at the table, you would know this is what's going on in our community. Okay. And should I tell them all? I won't tell them everything. It's like, okay. I won't,
hold off a little bit.
Hold back a little bit. Okay. So okay. All right, so the idea is Black women, even before we gained the right to vote in 1920, had been grassroots organizers, the creator of organizations that would serve the community, that we had the intellect. The first black female lawyer was in 1872, graduate of Howard Law School, 1872. We have had the structures in place, and we've been doing this a long time. And so many black women felt after this regime got in and started to attack diversity, equity, inclusion, and attack immigrants and attack others, that they said, well, you wanted this regime, you go do the protesting. Because if we walk out there with our brown selves, we're going to be attacked brutally. There was a grieving period in which we grieved the loss of the possibility of going in a different direction. And I have been understandably concerned that the grieving period has taken too long. That to have black women who are such an essential force when it comes to organizing and protest stay in the wings of this, I like to say, if you're not at the table, you may be on the menu. And when I've gone to protests, I see nothing about diversity on the signs. I see nothing about the attack on black institutions. Our issues are not there. And if we are not there, the issues are not going to be there. So I think, yes, it was wrong, but throughout the American history, we've been done wrong. You know, the wrong candidates gotten in for the wrong reason. You know, this has been a part of American history. We opened our hearts, but that opening of the heart has been very much a 10 to 12 year time frame. We began to think that this era of Barack Obama was much wider than it was. It wasn't. Based on a 250-year history, yes, we had this little smidgen of time, and we seem to feel like that time expands each time we tell it. Okay. So I think that we have to figure out how we're going to protest, where and when we enter. I've had the opportunity to talk to some people in other protest groups. They do not have black women in their leadership, or they have black women in the group but not in positions of power. There are black women's organizations that are focused more on getting people in office. And my concern is you're focused on a democracy, we may not have one by the time November comes along at this rate. So there is work to be done. We need to figure out how we can do it safely. The protest movement needs our institutional knowledge. It needs our creativity. And it needs us more than they think they do, because they actually think they can do this without us. And that's why it really hasn't gotten off the ground the way you want it to, because black women are not up in the mix. But I also keep saying it has to be done safely. My concern is black women have been the target of this administration. They are trying to undermine the progress of black people, of African Americans. This is going to continue to happen, and we're going to have to step into the fray. We have to decide when and where we enter, but we're going to have to enter the fray, because they are dismantling black history. They're dismantling our contributions. They're erasing our efforts. They're erasing our achievements. We cannot stand by and let them continue to do this. When the ball of oppression rolls, it's going to pick up steam. The last part of it is, I think the next group under attack, just as they're attacking the immigrants right now, will be the African American community. And we can't wait until that attack happens to start coming up with a plan.
Well, it's already happening in parts of New Orleans. Like, ICE has now decided that anybody darker than a paper bag is worth being detained, and our Supreme Court has allowed that. So we're already in this, and we've always been the target, and now people are just being added to that. And I think people need to be mindful of, it's not just the fight for immigrants. It's not just an immigrant's fight. It's all of it's our collective fight. And I think you made a good point of stating that.
Yeah, it is. And it's going to be, and the collective fight is going to have to be just that, unity. Because unity can beat divide and conquer. Going back to Bacon's Rebellion, if they can figure out a way to divide and conquer, they will. And then we'll be picked off one after another. Harvard's tried to stand alone. With all the money it has in its endowment, it tried to stand alone and couldn't. It needed to be with other universities and stand together as a force, as opposed to thinking that they could stand alone. And I was a fellow at the Kennedy School, so I'm not trying to put Harvard down, but I'm just saying that the university systems have to stand together. The unions have to stand together. We've got to come together, and that's a force that we will know will win. But if each group decides for their own reason not to join the fray, then we're going to get picked off one group at a time.
Well, I think we have to leave it there because we went a little over time. We're good on the no more questions, I think.
We have, okay.
Sorry, we're going to have to go to the book signing here, but if you have a question, you can ask it in the book signing line. The library is closing at 8 o'clock, so we got to make sure everyone who wants to get their books signed is able to do so. So give me one more round of applause for Jamie and Gloria. Thank you so much.